I remember the river even now, the Nile, its waters gentle and slow, as if reluctant to carry away something so precious. I was just a girl then, but old enough to know the weight of fear. The Pharaoh's decree had swept through our land like a storm. Every Hebrew boy child must be drowned. My mother's tears soaked the woven basket she had made for my baby brother. My father's arms trembled as he carried the little ark. And I had no tears left. I was appointed the watcher, the keeper of hope, the bridge between my brother's destiny and the unknown. I stood among the reeds, hidden but alert. Every ripple, every breeze that stirred the water made my heart leap. I didn't know what God planned, but I knew He was watching us too. Then, she appeared, the daughter of Pharaoh, drawn to the basket as if God Himself had placed it in her path. I held my breath, ready to step out. That was the first time I ever spoke on behalf of Moses. The first time God used me as a voice. I stepped from the shadow of the riverbank with trembling steps, but my voice was steady. It had to be. I was not just a girl in that moment. I was a messenger, a sister, a vessel for something greater than myself. The princess was unlike the women of Egypt I had seen from afar. There was compassion in her eyes as she lifted my brother from the waters. The way she cradled him, as though he was hers already, gave me courage. "Shall I go and fetch a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" I asked. My words were wrapped in innocence, but fastened with purpose. She looked at me, surprised at my boldness, but softened by the crying child in her arms. "Go," she nodded, her voice gentle but firm, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. I ran. I flew. I carried salvation in my feet. Back home, our house was flooded with tears, this time mixed with joy. My mother would get to nurse her son. My father would get to live knowing the boy still breathed. That moment forged something in me, something more than a sister's love. I understood that God weaves salvation through the ordinary thread of human movements. He doesn't always thunder from the heavens. Sometimes He whispers in the reeds. And I was listening. Moses was no longer just my brother. He was a mystery wrapped in destiny. Raised in the palace of Egypt, he grew tall and strong, wearing garments of royalty that never quite silenced the Hebrew heartbeat in his chest. I watched from the edges. I was no longer a child standing by the Nile. I was a young woman now, smarter, wiser, and more aware of the invisible threads God was still weaving. I saw Moses walking like an Egyptian prince, yet his eyes always searched for something deeper, something ancient, something ours. And though I was proud of him, I began to feel a stirring inside me as well. I was not just born to observe. I had my own song to sing, my own calling to embrace. When Moses fled, after killing the Egyptian he saw beating a Hebrew man, the air itself seemed to break around us. I felt the ache of abandonment, not just as a sister, but as a woman who knew what God had in store for him. I cried for days, like someone watching the sun vanish without promise of another dawn. But God is never finished when we think all is lost. Years passed, and every day I prayed and believed, clinging to the whispers of God that He would not forget us, that my brother would return, that I too was part of this unfolding story. And then one day, word came. Moses is back. He speaks like fire, and he carries the voice of God. My heart, dulled by years of waiting, ignited again. My hands trembled as Moses returned, not as the frightened man who fled, but as a voice that thundered with purpose. A shepherd's staff in his hand, but a divine fire in his speech. I stood beside Aaron, my younger brother, whose words like water flowed in harmony with Moses' call to Pharaoh. They were two branches of the same olive tree, rooted in God, bending toward justice. As for me, I was no longer just an observer. Though my voice was quieter back then, it was alive. Alive with prophecy, with music, with visions of a future none of us fully understood. I stood in the background when Moses declared God's message to Pharaoh, but I was already singing inside. When the first plague turned the Nile to blood, I remembered the day I stood by that water's edge. When frogs covered the land, I remembered the soft reeds, the basket, the miracle. Each plague was a pounding heartbeat of God's justice. I could feel it, like a drum summoning Israel to freedom. But with every act of judgment against the Egyptians, I also felt the weight of mercy. God was patient in his rage. He was precise, intentional. And one night, as Moses described the coming of the final plague, the death of the firstborn, I felt trembling in my bones. "Prepare your houses. Mark your doors with the blood of the Lamb," he said. And there I knew, the Lord himself was walking through Egypt that night. We waited. We watched. We believed. And when the cry of Egypt's despair rose like a shadowed storm in the night, we were quiet. Not because we were unfeeling, but because we had survived the judgment we all deserved. And freedom was calling. We moved as one people that day, out of the land that had crushed our backs, burned our hope, and smothered our songs. The air tasted different, like dawn, like possibility, like a prayer God had whispered for centuries was finally breaking into sunlight. I walked near the front, where Moses and Aaron led. But I was not silent. I had been silent long enough. I could feel the prophecy in me rising like a song that demanded release. I saw the young mothers carrying their babies, the next generation of a people who had known only chains. I saw old men holding children's hands, their eyes lit with memories of Pharaoh's bricks, but also with a hope older than any tyranny. We walked through the desert that day, but it felt like we were walking straight into a promise, not earned, but given. And yet, the miracle of freedom still had its shadow. Behind us, rising like anger itself, we heard it, Pharaoh's army. The pounding hooves, the rattle of chariots, the ground shaking beneath our feet. Panic spread like fire among the people. Cries rose. Fear took over. But Moses, my brother, stood tall. "Do not be afraid," he said. "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." I watched him raise his staff over the waters. Then I heard it. The wind and the sea opened, like a mother's arms making way for her children. We stepped on dry ground. We walked through walls of water, and with every step, faith replaced fear. I felt it, from the cries of the children to the fire in my own chest. We reached the other side. We turned. And we watched as the sea closed on Egypt's pride. The same waters that carried Moses toward life as a child now swallowed Pharaoh's might in death. I stood there, my whole being trembling, not with fear, but with glory. God had undone Egypt. And now it was time to sing. The ground was still damp beneath our feet, the scent of salt still clinging to the air. When the truth hit me, we had crossed over. Not just the sea, but the sorrow, the silence, the slavery of generations. I could not stand still. My spirit, overwhelmed by the God who tears oceans in half, compelled me to move. I found myself reaching for the tambourine, the same one I'd hidden in hope on the day we left Egypt. I had carried it not just in my hand, but in my heart. The rhythm came first, deep, rising, pulsing like the heartbeat of a nation that had just tasted freedom. Then the words. They flooded through me like fire, like a prophecy finally released. "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he is hurled into the sea." The women gathered around me, mothers, daughters, widows, warriors of faith. Their feet began to lift. Their bodies moved. Their voices rose, echoing the roar of the waters that had closed on our enemies. We danced. We worshipped. We declared the victory of the God who sees, who hears, who rescues. And in that moment, I was not just Moses' sister, not just a prophetess, not just a witness. I was a vessel of praise, a keeper of the song of deliverance. That day, heaven and earth joined in worship, and my voice was part of the chorus. After the dance, after the tambourines faded, after the echoes of liberation grew quiet in the wilderness, there was still more to learn. Freedom did not mean ease. Deliverance was only the beginning. I watched as Moses wrestled with the cries of our people, the thirst, the hunger, the longing for Egypt, even in their liberation. How strange is the human heart to prefer the chains it knows over the journey it fears. I felt it too. The frustration, the impatience, the unspoken questions. Is this what freedom is supposed to feel like? Then came the moment that marked me. My voice, which had spoken in strength, trembled with something darker, frustration, perhaps envy, perhaps a misplaced sense of ownership over the story God was writing through Moses. I spoke against him. Aaron and I questioned. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? I did not shout. I did not mock. But my heart had already wandered from obedience. I thought I was protecting what I knew, what I'd earned in my faith, but I was blind to the honor God had already given me, and then the cloud descended. The Lord spoke. Not to me, not through me, but about me. Moses' face was downcast. Aaron trembled. And I, Miriam the prophetess, stood still beneath the judgment of the one whose voice I had once echoed. Suddenly, my skin turned white. Leprous, like snow, like a symbol of my pride exposed. The silence of that moment was heavier than any command, louder than any song I had ever sung. And Moses, the brother I had once watched over by the Nile, cried out on my behalf. "Oh God, please heal her." And God did. But not before I was sent outside the camp. Not before I felt what it was like to be cut off, even from the presence of those I loved. 7 days. 7 days of silence. 7 days of learning that the gift of leadership is not ownership. That the voice of a prophet is not above correction. I returned healed. But never the same. The desert feels different when you walk alone. During my 7 days outside the camp, the wind was my only companion. The silence was full, not empty. Every breath seemed to whisper the same truth over me. Even those who sing God's victory must bow before his voice. But on the 7th day, I heard them. Footsteps. Soft at first, then many, approaching, pausing, honoring the moment. Israel had waited for me. Not because I deserved it. Not because I was flawless. But because grace is the rhythm of God's people. When I walked back into the camp, I saw faces lifted, not in triumph, but welcome. Aaron's eyes were soaked in tears. Moses' smile, subtle and humble, was enough to heal the final part of me that still ached. I didn't speak right away. My song had quieted. But not died. It was deeper now, like a well that had touched the bottom of itself and found water, sweeter than before. I looked not at my hands, but at my heart. God had not removed my gift, just refined it. He had not erased my voice, just tuned it. And so I walked not ahead, not behind, but alongside the people. We continued our journey together. A people of promise. A woman restored. The wilderness is a strange teacher. It strips away what you thought you knew, only to give you something richer, truer, and at a cost. We walked the desert for years, not because God is slow in promise, but because we were slow in faith. Sometimes I would look up at the endless horizon and feel the weight of it all, millions of us, walking, waiting, wandering, hoping. I often reflected on the balance between strength and surrender. A woman of God must know both. I had strength, I had wielded tambourines in triumph, spoken with courage in the face of royalty, led women through waters and into worship. But surrender? True, quiet surrender? That was a harder song to sing. Yet that's what the wilderness is for, to tune the soul to God's rhythm. I watched Moses carry the burden of leading us, his face etched with both the glory of God's presence and the exhaustion of human frailty. Aaron stood faithfully too, bridging the people to the priesthood. And I stayed present. Not as loud now, but vibrant in spirit. Some women would come sit by me, asking questions, seeking wisdom. Younger ones, curious about worship and prophecy. Others, mothers and widows, would simply sit in silence, drawing comfort from being near someone who danced through deliverance and limped through discipline. Strength and surrender, they met each other in me. And I learned that both are needed to walk with God through desolate places. Because He does not need perfect steps, only faithful ones. The desert sands had a way of measuring time, not in hours or days, but in lives. Each grain beneath my sandals felt like a story already written, or a seed waiting to be planted. I began to feel it then, that quiet awareness that my time was closing like the final chapter of an ancient scroll. Not heavy, not sudden, but soft, like a sunset that knows its beauty is in the fading as much as the shine. I watched the young women train their daughters how to weave linen, how to pray over their loaves. I listened as mothers sang lullabies about the God who split the sea and fed us with manna. They didn't know their words would carry across centuries, but I began to pull a few of the younger ones aside, the ones whose eyes shone with the fire I once knew in my youth. Do not let silence settle over your song, I told them. Worship is not always a shout. Sometimes it is the last whisper you breathe when no one else understands your faith. I reminded them of Egypt, not to relive the chains, but to remember the deliverer. I told them of the plagues, the Passover, the sea. I told them of my pride, my discipline, my renewing. I told them to honor God even when they didn't understand Him, especially then. And I taught them this. A woman of God is not perfect, but she is faithful. My voice was gentler by then, my steps slower. But I still carried the echo of the tambourine in my bones, still felt the rhythm of deliverance in my chest. Because even when my body would rest in the sands of Kadesh, my song would continue. It came, not with thunder nor wind, my final day, just a whisper, a cooling shadow of peace that draped itself gently over my weary bones. The desert was still that morning. Moses and Aaron came to sit with me, not as leaders, but as brothers. For the first time in so long, we were children again. No judgments. No burdens. Just love. Moses didn't speak at first. He didn't have to. That was the beauty of a bond forged by the fires of Pharaoh and the miracles of God. Sometimes silence was the softest language. Aaron took my hand, his grip still strong though he had aged as well. The three of us, siblings shaped by both sorrow and splendor, knew this moment would come. I looked into Moses' eyes and saw the Red Sea rising within them again. Not of water this time, but memory. I understood then that just as I had watched over the life of Moses at the Nile's edge, God had been watching over mine. Through the reeds, through the sea, through the wilderness, through my mistakes and my song, I smiled. I am ready, I breathed. And in that calm, the wind seemed to still. Even the desert paused. I did not fear death. I had lived. I had worshipped. I had seen God's salvation, and there is no fear in the face of the one who holds both life and eternity. So I closed my eyes, and I rested in the quiet arms of the same God who opened oceans and healed my leprous skin. I left nothing behind, except my song. When Miriam died, the desert itself seemed to sigh. The sand, always shifting, ever restless, held still beneath Israel's feet. The wind, which had so often howled through their tents, fell silent. For 7 days, the people did not move. A nation stopped for a woman. The tambourines were silent. The songs she once led now little more than echoes. Yet the memory of her voice, her bravery, her dance on the shores of deliverance, those things lingered like incense in their souls. The children who had heard her stories grew quiet, clutching their mother's garments. The women who had danced with her held their silence like an offering. And the men, toughened by war and wandering, felt the ache of her absence. Israel had lost their first prophetess, their sister, their song. Moses stood alone for long moments outside her place of burial, just a simple mound in the sands of Kadesh. His robes billowed in the soft breeze as if the desert itself were grieving with him. He was not just mourning a sister. He was mourning a spiritual pillar, a familiar prayer, a voice that had spoken for God long before he had. Aaron wept too. His hands, once lifted in priestly blessing, trembled with the weight of loss. For 7 days, Israel didn't take a single step. Not out of fear or indecision, but out of reverence. They remembered. They honored. They stood still and let grief complete its sacred work. For Miriam had not merely lived among them. She had walked with them. And now she would go before them into the promise she only glimpsed. It is a strange thing to lead a people into promise and yet feel the absence of the ones who began the walk with you. As I stood by the grave of my sister, I remembered the river. I remembered the reeds. I remembered the girl who stood watching over me with a courage far greater than her years. Miriam had always watched. She watched Pharaoh's cruelty with fierce indignation. She watched Israel's suffering with unyielding hope. She watched me, her brother, not as a leader only, but as a soul entrusted to her. She had always been a voice before mine ever echoed. I remember her laughter, unapologetically loud. Her temper strong, like fire. Her eyes alive with the glory of the God she served before she ever knew what it meant to be a prophetess. She was the first to dance after the sea parted, the first to sing about the God who shattered oppression, the one who taught the women of Israel to worship not in silence, but in strength. And yes, she was also the first among us to fall under God's correction. She wore her humility with grace. Even discipline did not crush her spirit. As I trace the years in my mind, I see now. Miriam was never only my sister. She was the rhythm of our deliverance. She was the storm and the stillness. She was the song we did not deserve, but God gave anyway. And though I lead still, my voice feels quieter without hers beside it. But her song is not gone. It lives in the women she taught, in the tambourines they carry, in the faith that now fills the desert sky like the promise of rain. Perhaps that is the way of all who walk with God. They do not vanish. They reverberate. Years passed. The desert grew familiar and yet never quite home. But amidst the shifting sands and fading footprints, there were certain names the children never forgot. Miriam was one of them. Around the fires at night, mothers would whisper her story to their daughters. They spoke of the child with brave eyes who watched over her baby brother at the river, of the woman who danced with fire in her steps after God split the sea, who stood and worshipped when others stood and doubted. Some said her voice could quiet storms. Others said her tambourine could shake heaven itself. But even the youngest knew this. The woman with silver-lined hair and desert-worn feet was not just a story. She was a sound. A rhythm, a remembrance of what it means to trust God with every scar and every song. Young Hebrew girls would practice her melody long after dusk, beating their makeshift drums, not perfectly, but passionately. They learned to weave worship into their work, strength into their speech, and courage into their waiting. And the sons of Israel, too, would learn from her. They'd hear of how she spoke truth even when it cost her, how she bowed under God's correction and rose again to walk in grace. They learned that prophets are not made of perfection, but surrender. Her name was not just history. It was heritage. And when they finally reached the border of the promised land, countless eyes turned back, not to the desert that shaped them, but to the memory of those who carried them through it. Miriam was one of the first. One of the strong. One of the faithful. My voice, once carried by desert winds, now mingles with centuries. Does it surprise you? That a girl who once hid in the shadows of a riverbank would become a voice echoing through the daughters of time. I was not perfect. I was not always patient. There were days I questioned Moses, questioned God, even questioned myself. But the one who writes our stories uses the broken reed as much as the polished staff. To the women walking through their own wilderness, whether it be grief, waiting, or the uncertainty of tomorrow, I say this. You're seen. You're heard. You're held by the same hand that parted seas and provided manna. I walked with a tambourine, not as a sign of triumph alone, but as a testament that worship is a weapon against despair. My song did not start at the Red Sea. It began the day I learned that faith was stronger than fear. It grew each time I stood between danger and a brother, between silence and truth, between despair and a dancing drum. And you, yes, you who reads these words with breath caught in your chest, you have a song too. Your story may not bear my name, yet it carries the same power, the same fire of the God who set me free. Carry your tambourine, even if your hands tremble. Sing, even if the echo seems small. Walk, even if the path is not complete. Because when you find your voice, you're not just speaking. You're setting generations free. To all who have walked this journey with me, thank you for lending me your heart, your imagination, and your time. I pray that as my story washed over you, it wasn't just words you heard, but echoes of your own calling. I am Miriam, prophetess, protector, praiser. Yet more than titles, I was a sister, a sinner, a servant, who dared to believe that the God who rescued me as a child could use me as a woman. And so I leave you with this truth. Your voice matters. Whether you're called to lead with words, sing with tears, or stand silently with courage, know this. God is not done writing through you. The desert may feel long. The waiting may feel heavy. But like water drawn from the rock, your purpose will flow at the right time. It might look like worship. It might look like intercession. It might even look like dancing when the world expects you to drown. So rise up. Pick up your tambourine, your gift, your story, your voice. Let it ring across your family, your community, your generation. And when you do, remember me not just as the singer at the sea, but as the girl whose song was born from watching, believing, and surrendering. The God who saw Miriam sees you too. If this story of Miriam blessed you, don't walk away silently. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful woman of the Bible whose voice still speaks today.